Hey, Dave here. Welcome to Commercial Construction Elevate the Industry. We're on season 3, episode number 11. And I got to tell you, this episode has nothing to do with commercial construction. It's more of a life topic. It's about religion. I know you're not supposed to mix religion, politics, and other potentially polarizing issues with a business podcast. And I don't intend to do that except for today. I've had questions about religion my entire life. I've gone through many stages. Maybe you have too. I would ask that you listen with an open mind and let me know what you think. Go to my website, adacorp.com, and leave your thoughts there. Do you like it? Do you not like it? Would you like me to delve into some other life issues? Because I'm not going to mix it with commercial construction. I can guarantee that. If we do anything, it's going to be on a separate podcast, but I need your feedback. Anyway, enjoy this episode. Our last episode does have a lot to do with commercial construction. It's called The Best Of. We've done over 40 episodes now, and we've taken clips from what we think are the best episodes that really discuss in detail and embody, I guess is the best word, the message we're trying to get across through this podcast. That's going to be on the 10th, so enjoy both. And until then, stay safe and stay tuned. Hey, everybody, I'm your host, Dave Persida. Welcome to the podcast. I'm excited to be able to interview a longtime friend and business associate who is now the pastor at the church at Covenant Park, Dan Crow. Dan, welcome to the podcast.
Glad to be with you, David. Really good. Yeah.
So we're straying a little bit from our normal business topics, but we will lead this to business in the end. But Dan, we're gonna talk about a lot of things today. Everything from you personally to the church to poverty and how business can help. And I'm excited to delve into all these things. And I've known you to be so thoughtful. And when I mean thoughtful, I don't mean just nice. I mean you're full of thought. And all our conversations in the past have been very cool. I've learned a lot from you, and I expect our audience will today. We will get into some subjects that are near and dear to me, and I'm sure that most of our listeners can relate to. So let's first start by a little bit of background on you, Dan. I know you were born and raised in Mississippi. You have 5 kids. Your wife named Becky, who was lovely. Tell us about your years growing up in Mississippi and your first stint as a pastor.
I was raised in Vicksburg, Mississippi, which is noted for the Civil War. And Vicksburg was the only city in America to ever be under siege. And for that 6 weeks period back in 83. It's really interesting. That's 1863. But it was a great place to be raised if you're going to be in Mississippi, in that the Waterways Experiment Station was there. And so you had a lot of people coming in from around the country. You had a strong military presence because it was a secure place. But it also means that I lived in an integrated neighborhood where most people did not. My dad's boss, the general, was a black man. And matter of fact, I was dear friends with his son. We played ball together. And I had a different relationship than a lot of people do with racial issues in Mississippi. So I'm grateful for that. Dave, I've pastored in 3 different places as far as a senior pastor. I started in Marks, Mississippi. Marks is not noted for anything, I don't think, other than in 1963 through 70, it was the poorest county in America. And it's in Quitman County. And when you would drive into that county, you'd see the sign that says Quitman. And it just made you want to, kind of lay down and then let it go. But that is the reason that's notable is I began there in the very late fall of 79, and that was only 12 years after the Poorest People's March started to go to Washington, D.C. that Dr. Martin Luther King had organized. And the Kennedys were in town. town. You know, a lot of people were in town back in the early days in '63 when they marched through, but that started in Marks, Mississippi. I did not know that when I went to pastor that church, and it would have been helpful to know because of some of the things I dealt with in that church. But I was there for 4 years, then moved to urban Pittsburgh, where we lived in a very urban neighborhood, the most densely populated place in Pennsylvania. I would have thought it would have been in Philadelphia, but we were there where it was 11,000 people per square mile, and it was really tight. And it was funny to be a Mississippi Baptist moving into a 97% Italian Catholic neighborhood. That was its own learning curve. And we also moved there right at the beginning of the Rust Belt. I saw J&L Steel close. I saw them padlock that. 22,000 jobs went away right away. So the Lord's had an interesting point in my life, kind of bringing me along where I've always been in places that were tinged and touched and crashed by poverty at different points. That all changed 23 years ago when I left Pittsburgh. After 15 years there, well, Dan, we moved to Howard County.
Before we get to Howard County.
Okay, sure.
So you were a Southern Baptist at one time, moved into a primarily Catholic neighborhood in Pittsburgh. How did that go?
Well, it was not only, it was Italian Catholic. So that was with a name like Crow as your last name. I wanted to really change it to be like Croelli or Crotini. Right. You know, that Crow didn't sound right. It went really well. It was a great learning curve. Like I said, I was raised Southern Baptist. Now I've evolved, and I'm not a part of that group anymore. I don't run with some of the things they go with and some of the stigmas they have. So, but anyway, we're non-denominational now. But yeah, I was that, and quite honestly, we were seen as outsiders. They pushed back a little bit, but at the same time, love never fails. And you treat people with integrity; it always works. And you know, we became fast friends. As a matter of fact, I never thought I'd leave Pittsburgh because I really, really enjoyed the ministry there. We had people from 31 countries in our church. The church grew from 40 people to about 800, you know, on average attendance. And we were meeting in 2 locations because our initial location was very small. I had a chance to speak to a president there. A president came through, Bill Clinton, which was a watershed moment for me because the Southern Baptists decried me for speaking to that guy, that Clinton guy. They said, that means you endorsed his campaign. I said, well, if I did, that's what you may think, but I did not. I made a point. CNN, after the message was over that day and we walked outside, CNN immediately came and said, Pastor Crow, does this mean you endorse the Clinton campaign? And I said, no, what it means is Governor Clinton, he was running for president at that time. He had just accepted the nomination on Thursday night. This is Sunday. He had gotten that in New York City at Madison Square Garden. But they said, does that mean you endorse the Clinton campaign? I said, no, it means the governor endorsed what we do, and that's the worship of the Lord Jesus Christ, and just share his love with all people. And so that was a very important moment for me in the sense that it cut some ties that had been strongly to my roots, and it started launching me into another place, another future. So living in Pittsburgh, I grew to understand the non-exclusive nature of denominations. That, you know, we tend to identify with those, but I began to realize that if I'm going to worship the living God, he cares about everybody. He loves everybody. He reaches out to everybody. And I've got to realize that we have more of a universal message rather than an exclusive message. But you know, it's the kind of thing that I look for the way to share love and light with wherever we go. And so that impacted a lot of things with us there. We worked heavily with Catholic Charities in helping settle the Kurdish refugees who were coming over from Iraq, a very persecuted group of people who were Islamic. But as they came to Pittsburgh, we did English as a second language for them. And we hosted that in our building, and we became fast friends with them. And we had the Hmong people from, they are people that were in Laos, but they were being genocided by the Khmer Rouge during the Vietnam War. And they relocated to Pittsburgh. And we had several hundred of them meet with us every week. And matter of fact, the pastor of that church, Tong Chong Vang, wrote the definitive grammar for the Hmong people because they were illiterate. They had no written language. And that happened at our church. And so that was really kind of neat. You know, it gave me a very different aspect. And one other thing, Dave, that you and I talked about, I got an opportunity to work with the University of Pittsburgh football team. I was I'd been on campus, just Pitt had 102 language groups, and I was fascinated by it. That's my first year there. And I met a guy, became friends with him, and he happened to be the offensive coordinator for the University of Pittsburgh. And they asked me to come be the chaplain. And I worked with them for a number of years, and I just enjoyed that time. Put me in another fraternity, another life, and that was really great.
So Dan, and we're going to get into, you talked about politics, you talked about not being extricated, but being separated from the Southern Baptist Church, the fact that you're now non-denominational. Well, I want to get into all of that. But in the last piece, now you've been in Columbia now since what, 98, 99?
98, yeah, 23 years.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and that's when I met you 23 years ago and change. Yeah. You've seen lots of change, and we're going to just hit this for one, a quick minute. You and I go back a long way. We met when you became the pastor for Covenant Baptist Church, right?
Yeah, that's what it was at that time. That's correct.
And I think that when you walked into that, you really didn't understand what you were walking into. Is that correct?
That's an understatement.
Okay. Well, I met you, and let's just, for the audience, look.
Yeah.
Dan was a pastor of a church that owned a lot of land, didn't have the money to develop it. I was the president of the Soccer Association of Columbia and Howard County. We had a lot of money, but no land to develop soccer fields on. We got together and did what we call a private partnership. And, we always said, Dan, that, and it's funny that we're talking after all this time, that the soccer fields would live on. We built 10 fields, and we shared parking, and we leased back property to you so you could build your church. We got what we wanted, you got what you wanted. And that's going to lead into the next thing, which is the community. I see you as a community leader, okay? And we're going to get to that. But Dan, before, just as a backdrop, if you could, as a pastor, as a person in religion, we're going to call organized religion, we're going to call it, I'm going to say church a lot. Okay. You know what we mean. Okay. But could you identify the basic types, the different churches that are influencing today's society, if you could do that? And you were once a Southern Baptist, but let's talk about Catholic, Presbyterian, and so on real quick. What are the differences? What are they, and what are the differences?
Well, Catholics have a long tradition. I mean, Baptists like to jokingly say, and we said these things, it's kind of crazy, but they say, the Catholics would say, we go back to St. Peter. And Baptists like to say, well, we went back to John the Baptist, who was before Peter, so, which is a total joke. But at the same time, that was that. But, the Catholic Church gave birth to what would be called ultimately the Protestant Reformation in 1517. And that is when Martin Luther became a disgruntled priest. And, ultimately what split out of that, he never intended to split. He really wanted to reform. But institutions tend to want self-preservation. That's what we tend towards. So they didn't want that. So he was on the outs. But that began different denominational splits. And so that would be he in the Lutheran Church, John Calvin, and the Presbyterians. And the Baptists were this group that were kind of persecuted by all of them, because one distinction of Baptists is that this is other evangelicals too today, but Baptists believed in adult baptism, not infant baptism. The other groups would baptize a child as an infant, and Baptists would say the Bible teaches that every illustration in the Bible that is there of a baptism is of adult. It's of somebody saying, I want to be baptized. And so they take that to say your family can't put you into faith. You have to choose faith. You have to choose to do that. And I believe that. I think you can be born into a faith family, but at the same end, that may make it more conducive for you. But each one of us has to choose what we want to believe. And, that's freedom of thought. And that affected America, quite honestly. That Baptist philosophy is saying autonomy, which means that you have the right to choose who you run with. The idea of cooperation, you can choose to cooperate who you want to or not to cooperate with. And they also had the other distinctive of separation of church and state, which is really a very important thing. And matter of fact, the irony today is that the Southern Baptist Convention likes to align with power groups. They were definitely aligned with President Trump on that side. And so, they went against their own beliefs. And somebody asked me one time, they said, why did you leave the Baptist group? I said, actually, I didn't leave them. They left me. I'm kind of a historical Baptist the way that it was. But at the same time, because I believe in freedom of thought, I believe in soul competence, which means each person needs to decide and has the capacity to determine how to relate to God. God has a way calling us, but we have to choose if we want to do that or not. We also have the capacity that we don't have a mediator. We can pray to God on our own. We don't have to have a priest in between us and God. God talks to each of us. And, as I've grown, I've evolved, Dave. Quite honestly, that's important to note that if you're not evolving, you are becoming a fossil. It's what's happening. So, it's really important to keep moving forward. But, what I've come to realize, everybody that I talk to, it doesn't matter if they're Hindi, it doesn't matter if they're Islamic, it doesn't matter if they're Jewish, it doesn't matter if they say they're an atheist. All of us have this sense of something is bigger. So there's something else there. And I call that the Christ consciousness. There's an awareness that there's something that we need. And you can find different ways to fill that void. But when we began working in the not-for-profit world, Dave, which was at post this time we're talking about, when I began doing that, I realized one day when people said, are you a faith-based organization? I would say, yes, we are. We work with people of good faith. And it doesn't matter to me. If you want community good and you want to build community, we work with you. So therefore, we would work with Jewish congregations. We would work with Islamic congregations. We would work with people who had no faith, but they were good faith people. So that's the thing that I think that is that Christ consciousness. Some people would call it cosmic consciousness, but I think it's more than karma. Karma is a real thing. I'm not saying that's not. Give and you shall receive. I mean, you give the way you get. The way we do that, we receive the way that we give.
That's well said. And before we take a break, Dan, I want you to, and this is going to be hard for you because you are a man of many words.
Too many words.
No, many words. In like one or two or three sentences, I want you to tell me what you think the role of the church is in today's society. High level.
What it is or what it should be?
What it is. We'll talk about what it should be. What it is. What is today? What is the role of the church in today's society?
The church is we do a bad job at this, but the church should be a prophetic voice for justice and mercy. It should be a prophetic voice for hope in the midst of despair. And it should be a place where all people are respected and all people are accepted. To accept somebody does not mean you have to approve of everything they do, believe, or say, but it means you accept them with the respect that you have for people. The church needs to do that because the founder of the church is Jesus Christ. And there was never a person, as you read the account of Christ, that he ever disrespected. Even people who were violently against him, he still treated with human respect. And that's what the church must be. It's got to be a home for all people.
Well said. So we're going to take a quick break, and when we get back, we're going to talk about the church's role in social services and beyond. So we'll see you all in a minute.
Hey everybody, I'm Dave Presida, president of Adequate Construction Services, LLC, and I would love to talk to you business owners about your business. I bet you most of you that are listening have at least 75% of your personal equity tied up in the business. If you care about options on how to get that money out, that's what I want to talk to you about because I've been through it. I was a business owner and I sold my business. Didn't even know there was a buyer, but there are plenty of them. There has never been a better time than now to sell your business. So maybe you haven't even thought about it. The last deal I did, the guy, I talked to him, I said, have you ever considered selling your business? He goes, didn't know I could. Well, yes, you can. There's a lot of options. I would urge you to go to my website, adicorp.com, ADICORP.com. My last name spelled backwards. And go to Season 1 Podcast, Episode 2, Sales and Acquisitions. It's going to answer a lot of questions you might have. Yes, we talk about how you value your company, but that's only one piece, right? We're talking about why you would sell, who would buy it, common concerns about you, your staff, your clients, your legacy, all important things to discuss. So go and listen to that podcast and then contact me. Either call me or leave a message on my contact page on the website and I will get back to you, because as I said when I started, I look forward to talking to you about your business between now and then. Stay safe and stay tuned.
Hey, welcome back, everybody. Dave Procida here. We're here with the pastor of the church at Covenant Park, Dan Crow. Dan, welcome back. Want to get right into social issues. And, knowing that religious organizations receive 70% of all charitable tax-free dollars, is the church doing enough in terms of social services? What do you think?
I can tell you've talked to Bill when you know that 70% thing.
I did.
But, yeah. The answer flatly is no. If across the board, no. Now, some do very well. I mentioned Catholic Charities when I worked in Pittsburgh. They're one of the number one relief agencies in the world. They're tremendous at what they do. Most groups, and there's other groups too. I mean, so I'm not trying to broad brush everyone, but on a very, what I would say, a descriptive line, I said it earlier that most institutions tend to self-preserve. That's what they do. And, I've had people tell me, why would we go build houses for people in Honduras? They said houses are, I said, it's what they need. I said, they don't have housing. So that's what we go do. They said, but you ought to be doing preaching meetings. I said, well, we're doing demonstration meetings. And out of that comes the other. We've never built a house that did not result in a new community of faith being started there. It always happens, but that's not our goal. Our goal is to go and do good. And quite honestly, I think churches have kind of, we're commissioned to go share the good news, but the good news is not just a message of words. It is a way of life, and it is a way of giving into a community. And I think, quite honestly, that we've enjoyed the tax breaks that a church gets. I enjoy that. I get a housing allowance that is non-taxable because I'm a pastor. It's the same as a military would get. But the basis upon which that was granted to churches was that churches offer a good community service. And it's not just to raise a moral line, it was to do service things. And churches have grown more inward, not more outward. So there's a lot of churches that have an outward focus, though. So I'm not trying to broad brush everyone, but that's one of the problems. If you look nationwide, I think that's an issue.
Well, some of the questions that I'm going to pose here are important for a lot of reasons, and a lot of them came from my family because they care about these things. For example, the homeless in Baltimore, right? There's, 2,200 by the mayoral count in 2021, and 12% of them, almost 300, were unsheltered, right? There's several different layers of homelessness. But do you know how many churches, Dan, are in the greater Baltimore area? I don't. Do you?
No, I really don't. It was called the city of steeples, though. I really don't have any idea. I've heard the number 800. I don't know if that's right or not, though.
Well, it could be, but I mean, that would be 3 people per church that would be sheltered. My point is, Dan, do you think that the religious groups deserve to be free of paying taxes?
If we do what we're supposed to do, yes.
Qualify.
But I mean, as in everything, there's qualifiers. But I would say that, I could see a justice being done, not an injustice, but a justice done to say that you needed to meet your threshold to have that exemption. There may be something. What do you do? I know that one thing. I've had friends who have a paranoia about saying the government's after us. I don't believe that. Okay, I want to be very clear about that. A government is what you need to live together. That's what politics is. It's about living together and bringing things together. So I'm not an anti guy, but I will say that when my friends would say, we're going to lose our tax-free status, I say, you know what, if you do good in your community, they're going to love you. They're not going to do that to you. And that's not the reason we would host the cold weather shelter here. But, we do that for 1 or 2 weeks a year we work with the Grassroots Association, Grassroots here in Howard County, and we will host the cold weather shelter. Now, COVID made that different because they're not allowing that to happen, together in our church facility. But what that meant is for a week or two, we would have 28 to 30 homeless people here. And what that did for me, that changed my view of what homelessness is, because I really thought homeless people did not work. I thought that they probably were living off assistance all the time. And what I realized is most of the families we had in our church, they were holding jobs, but they could not afford a house and a car. They could have the car, but they wanted their kids to have Howard County schools, which were better schools than what they had somewhere else. But to move to Howard County, they couldn't afford the rent that was here and that. They were working for it, but some of them worked 1 and 2 jobs. As a matter of fact, we had to keep the shelter open. We would eat dinner. We had a set time each day, like at 6 o'clock. But some of the guys got off work at 11, so we would get them dinner and hold that until they got back at midnight. But that was a fascinating thing for me to realize the levels of poverty. And what I do know, living in Howard County, many families are 1 paycheck or 2 paychecks away from a disaster. They live closely. It costs a lot of money to live in this county, but you have a lot of good benefits. The schools are good, and people come here for that. But they want the next generation to get out of it. That's why they're doing that.
So I know personally that you are one who gives back, no question about it. But let me ask you this, Dan. Churches, you said they're looking inward too much. Who do you minister to? Do you minister to your church members? Who do you minister to? Like, who is your audience? I think I know.
Well, because we're an open church, meaning we say everyone is welcome here, that gives us a diverse group that comes in. But when we say what we minister to, and David, I've got to be real honest here, COVID has changed everything on the way that we relate to people. Things that we had Zumba classes meeting in our building. We had different addiction groups and stuff. They could come here, meet. We have rehearsal groups for the public theater. We wanted our church to be used. The Soccer Association uses this for training. We haven't done that, since the COVID time, but we would have those in here. And those are community-based groups. Fellowship of Christian Athletes has an office here. We supply that. We have a Center Point Counseling. They give mental and health issues where they do counseling there. And we do some of that free of charge for people who have need. So, we minister to a lot of people that do not necessarily come and sit in here on Sunday morning.
Well, it's interesting. You use the word community.
Yeah.
And I think that's where you're headed. I know that was one of the things you said to me back in '98 when we first met, is you wanted to bring the community into the church, not into the church per se, but, bring the community back so people can enjoy the land and so on. And certainly that's worked, on a different subject, getting a little more granular.
David, one last thing before you go there.
Yeah.
When you and I began talking, because we had an asset we couldn't develop, and you had money that you could develop. When we began to do that, the thing that I visioned and I wanted, I said, I want Covenant Park. And that's what, by the way, graciously, that's what you guys call this, is Covenant Park. That was so cool.
Yeah.
But and the way we got our name, the name change, it wasn't because we decided to change our name to the Church at Covenant Park. That's what the community called us. Oh, you're that church at Covenant Park. You're the Church at Covenant Park. And that's how we got our name. The community named us, not us naming ourselves. And so we just adopted that. We said, don't fight it. But the thing that I said, I want Covenant Park to be a place of refreshment for the body, soul, and spirit. I mean, where you would enjoy creation, you'd enjoy the beauty of it, because it's a beautiful place. But that's why, and this is odd to me, we have the largest building on the property. But people don't see it as a church. They see the whole, and they think maybe it's an indoor soccer facility. And but we did not put church. We didn't put that big out there. There's a cross. It is tastefully done on the front of the building, but it just says the Church at Covenant Park. But we say it's a ministry center because we want it to be service for people. So yeah.
Well, I will say this firsthand, that's exactly what it is. Okay, because I think too often that people who are not, let's say, attached to a church or has a best friend that's a pastor or a priest or whatever, someone who is in the church, sometimes we can be hypocritical, just like we, say that church people are. I think if we all lose our way a little bit, that can happen. But for you and for that church, it's done well. For most churches, though, you talk about heaven and hell. Dan, spend a minute and tell me what you think about heaven and hell.
Well, aren't you diving deep into a topic today?
I mean, this is what people like me think about, right?
Yeah.
Is there a heaven? Am I
Yeah.
doomed to hell? We're going to get there in a minute.
Yeah. All right. Let me say it this way. I think that heaven is the most maximized life we can possibly live. I think it transcends this life that we're in. As a matter of fact, I have a body, I have a soul, I have a spirit, and the spirit is the transcendent part of us. With my body, I relate to the world that is, around me here. I'm in it. With my soul, I relate to the people and to the things around us as well. But if the body is beneath, the soul is that's how you're known. That's how you can feel somebody's around you and you haven't yet heard them or seen them, or you hear them coming and you know who it is, even though they haven't said a word. But then we also have a spirit, and our spirit is that we can perceive things that are bigger, more what I would call infinite, that are not time bound. And so as we are a tripartite being, that goes back to me theologically, that we do know that God is revealed as Father, Son, Spirit. If you look at the Hebrew and the Christian scriptures, not just one of them, you see it in both of them. But as we look at the Hebrew scriptures, it talks about a creation where we are created in the image of God. And we're human, we're Adam. The word Adam, it really means the human one. And he and Eve were the human ones. And so we have this body. Now this body dies, we know that. But that doesn't mean that it's over. So, the heaven is that reality that's there that we will perceive fully when we leave this one. But Jesus says, I'm coming to make the new heavens and the new earth. And he declared the kingdom had come when he came. It's not fully actualized yet, clearly. But heaven is going to be that place of reality where our character is crystallized, where we are continuing to grow. And I think that it does require us wanting to want that. It's not forced upon us. When I went back to that thing of soul competency and choice, God did not make us to be robots. He did not choose your destiny for you. He gave us a choice. We have a capacity. Freedom of will is very important. But we do know God in Scripture tells us plainly that Jesus did not come to condemn the world, but that the world should be saved through him. And we tend to make heaven be an idea like it's a Disneyland on steroids or something like that. I don't think it's that at all. I think it's much like the world is here, just without the entropy that we have here. The things that slow us down, the flaws that cause us to calcify, I would say, in our soul more than to grow in our spirit. And so it's important for us to realize that there's not going to be any tears, there's not going to be any crying, not any pain, nor any such thing. It also says there's not going to be any separation. I get a lot of this from the picture that is painted in a book the last book in the scriptures called Revelation, that if you read that literally, it will scare you, and it's a scary thing, but it's not a literal book. It's not meant to be read literally. One thing about the scriptures, I've got a copy right here, but the thing of the scriptures, it's not a level book. You don't read it all the same way. There's poetry in there. There's history in there. There's the idea of wisdom that is in there.
There's sexism.
What's that?
Sexism. I mean, there's a lot of things.
Yeah. Well, it's a story of how humans develop. It really is. So it is there. And any of these topics we have to discuss. It's very important. And we have to also remember who it was written to, when it was written, how it was compiled. And that's a very important thing. It's not enough just to say, well, I believe a Bible. It is a sacred book in that it's different, but it's also got wisdom for us that if we will get into it and understand it, we find ourselves in the story. That's the thing I love about it.
I mean, a lot has to do with the way it's interpreted, right?
Yeah, sure.
Now, you mentioned the word, you have to want heaven.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me ask you this.
Yeah.
Some preach that unless you accept your Jesus as your Lord and Savior, right? You don't, if once you accept Jesus as your Lord and Savior, then you can go to heaven. So my question to you is first of all, is that your position? Okay, that you need to accept the Jesus as your Lord and Savior to go to heaven, because if that's the case, we're going to leave a lot of people behind. Is that your position, number one?
I'm going to say this to you, David. Go back and watch the last 4 messages I've talked here on YouTube. You'll see some of that. So I'll say that, okay? But the other thing I would say is, listen, Jesus said it this way: I'm the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except for through me. Now, so I believe that. Now, here's the thing I'd say: how do you interpret that? The thing that I would say, and this is very important for us to understand, I did a chat on YouTube Monday night where I had a friend of mine who was raised in a Jewish family, and he said this. He said, you know what? I believe Jesus was in me before I ever asked him into my life. He said, I just had this awareness. I said, well, Ron, that's the Christ consciousness. That's there. And the thing that we find out is Hebrews, the book of Hebrews in the very first chapter says this. It says, God has spoken to us in many and various ways throughout the course of history. I don't know how the Lord reveals himself to people. But I will say this, from talking to Thai Buddhists, from talking to Filipino spiritists, from African bush people, I mean, to different people I've met that have come to know Christ, many of them said, I knew who he was, I just didn't know his name. And the thing is, I think that's a reality we have to understand. Our God is wanting to bring the world to himself. I love what it says in 2 Corinthians chapter 5. It says, God was in Christ, reconciling the world to himself. And he has committed unto us this word of reconciliation. And therefore, we share that word. And so that's why I think it's a unifying thing. He is not saying, I don't want some in. He wants everybody there. And that's the thing that I love about this. Now, I will say this. You can say, I don't want that. When I was a young man, before I gave my life to Christ and became a Christian, I was an atheist. Now, I call myself an atheist, but I was an angry man, angry at the concept of God. I had gone through some personal pain, some different things, and I just was angry at God. So therefore, I call myself an atheist. But I was arguing with this whole idea that there was a God. And when I realized that it was foolish for me to do that, and I realized that I said, you know what? I'm going to surrender to this. I'm going to say, Jesus, if you can do anything with me, do that. When he did that, he overcame my will in that sense. But I had to choose that. I could have said no. And you can say to the divine, I do not want you. Matter of fact, Dave, I think it's important, even when we use the word God, I think it's really important. I've quit using that word a whole lot because people think of God and they think of so many different things. I like to call him the great divine, because it's also her, the great divine. If God made male and female in his image, what that means is God has a feminine side. I don't understand all these things, but that's a reality. So, that he is divine father, but he's also divine mother. And that is such an important thing for us to understand, that it's a concept that kind of evades us because we want to be very concretized. But God is far bigger than any box.
Well, Dan, what you're saying, I think, and you have a tremendous way with words, and you're easy to listen to, is that, God is Jesus is in people when they don't even know it. For example, a child who only lives to age 3, right, doesn't know Jesus. Is that person doomed?
Absolutely not. I mean, that's fiendish. That is a fiendish way to view God. And again, I would say the divine. Yeah, so when you say the divine, it kind of gives a lift to it. It makes you go like, this isn't just a little thing. The divine Almighty, the divine counselor, the divine wisdom. Jesus was the divine human. He was human and yet divine. And he shows us what God is. Jesus said, if you've seen the Father, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. And so when people say, what is God like? I say, look at Jesus. And, read the gospel accounts, read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. See what Jesus did. See how he acted. See, when people say that that the church is patriarchal. Our history is patriarchal, no doubt about it. But I will say, and some will say it's been misogynistic, and I think that's strongly true in many cases too. But I would say this: that's never how Jesus was. You look at Jesus's ministry, and if you read the Gospels, you find out that a great many women followed him all the time. Mary Magdala was one of his chief resources. As a matter of fact, she's the one that Jesus said to her, you go tell the apostles, you go tell those other guys, my brothers, that I am alive. They would not have known it without her word. So when people go, well, all the apostles were male, the ones that we know of were male, but Jesus sent a woman as an apostle to the apostles, which I think that's phenomenal. That's crazy. But when you interpret God through the lens of Jesus, rather than saying what kind of God is other than Jesus, that's just not right. Jesus said, I and the Father are one. You've seen me, you've seen the divine.
So let me ask you this, and again, in layman's terms.
Yeah.
Again, these are things that I think about. For example, you could live a good life, be giving, add value to people's lives, be a wonderful father, husband, wife, whatever, and never accept Jesus formally into your heart. Or you could be on the other end of the spectrum, right? A pedophile, a mass murderer. But because you are on your deathbed with somebody like you who says, will you accept Jesus into your life? Yes. Or, do you repent? Yes. Therefore, you get a free pass to heaven. I want to hear what you have to say about that,
Dan. I'm glad you're asking that, Dave. That harkens me, and I'm going to give you an answer. You said I do a lot of words. I'm going to give you a few here. When I was in college, I was in a philosophy class, and the professor said, we're going to pretend today that God is on a break. He's taking a coffee break, and he's left you in charge of determining who gets in and who gets out. And he listed 10 different people, and some of them would have been like what you described, the different spectrums and different things. And some people never heard, some people were very ugly and, heinous. He said, so who do you let in? Who do you let out? And he says, Mr. Crow, would you start? And he called on me to do it. And I said, Doc, I can't do that. He goes, well, you have to. This is part of the class. I said, well, I'm not going to do it. And I wasn't trying to be cute, and I wasn't trying to be ugly. But he said, but you have to. I said, I'm not going to. I said, because here's the problem. I would probably let in people that should not go. And I'd probably let out people that should go. I said, I'm not wise enough to know that. That's God's prerogative. And I said, I think that's what we call vain philosophy. When Paul says avoid vain philosophy, I said, God's never going to take a break. He's never going to leave that up to me. Now, you ask me what I think about these things, and I will gladly answer that. The thing I would say, I love what this is in the Hebrew scriptures, but in the book of Micah, the prophet Micah, he's considered a minor prophet, but he's not. He says this. He said, you know what the Lord requires of you, to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. I think that's a tremendous statement of what God requires. And that's what he said. He said, oh man, oh human, you know what God requires, to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. Now, when I take that in light of what Jesus taught, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. For Jesus to say, you know what, you can say that you're living righteously, but if you're doing this, he said, you're not, you're being a hypocrite. And Jesus called those things out, not with lack of respect for people, but he said, I'm trying to help you see what you're really doing and saying. So what I would say, I think that people who model the character of Christ, I think they are responding to that Christ consciousness that's in them. They may not know that, but it doesn't matter if we know it or not. I don't have to see it for it to be true. I don't know how lights work. I don't know how electricity works, but I know when I turn on a switch, it works, and I'm happy with that. These are things I can't figure out. Now, for somebody who has had a rough life, an angry life, of what I would call a vile life, and they are at the end of their life, and they would say, have mercy upon me, I've got to tell you, I don't think it gives them a free pass, but I do know this. There was a thief on a cross next to Christ one day. Jesus is in the middle, and he's on this cross, and he's being crucified for being the King of the Jews. That's what they said. And so that's what he's there for. This guy next to him, who had been jeering and reviling him before, because it says both thieves were shouting insults at Christ. This one, after hearing Jesus say, Father, forgive them, they don't know what they're doing, He says, something is different about this guy. I've been wrong. And he turns to Jesus and he says, Lord Jesus, would you remember me when you come into your kingdom? And Jesus said, today you will be with me. Now, I don't know how that awakening happened. I don't know what happened, but I will say this. I couldn't presume to know what's in the heart of somebody who is there. And I would say this. I think that if people are banking on saying, that's what I'm going to do at the end, I'm going to live the life I want to live, I'm going to be, an abuser of people, abuser of children, or whatever it is, and at the end I'm going to repent, I'm going to tell you right now, that's set up for failure. Because what that's saying is, I can dictate to God how I come to him, and you can't do that. I was sharing with a guy one day, and he says, I really want this Jesus that you're talking about, but I'm going to do it tomorrow. And I'll never forget, I said, well, you're not going to do it tomorrow, because that means you're telling God how you come to him. And he's told us we come to him with a heart that is broken and saying, God, I need you.
But you mentioned, Dan, and I love where this is going. You mentioned Jesus many times. What about a Jew who doesn't believe that Jesus is, what would you say to a Jewish person or a person that does not believe in God, but lives a good life?
That's interesting, because I've had a lot of conversations with people that would be characterized that way. I think it's interesting to me that that I've met more people who are Jewish that really tend to go toward atheism and it being against the concept of God than of other groups. That's fascinating to me, knowing the history. But what I would say is, I would talk to them very plainly. I would tell them what I believe. I tell them why I believe it. Then I leave it up to them. If they say, I don't want that, the one thing I do know about God has made us with a choice. If we, it's kind of like if somebody says, and I've had people say this to me, I don't want your damn salvation. I don't want to know that. I say, I can't do anything for you there except for keep praying for you and love you, but you're still my friend. You don't have to agree with me for me to be your friend. Thank God for that. But, we can have respect for people, but I don't know those answers, Dave. And the thing that I would say, I think that we are foolish to say, well, here's their eternal destiny. The thing that I know, and this again, it mystifies me, and the older I get, the more precious it becomes. God was in Christ reconciling the world to himself. And when you see the world, it's not, I don't know, everything is going to be the way he meant it to be. And meaning he's going to make it with the intention he had, rather than us just doing our own thing and then coming around to it one day. It's going to be an incredible thing to see that. And I don't know what all that means, but I do know this. That is evil will be brought to right. I mean, it does not mean that, things that are evil are going to have a sense of judgment, because God is a God of justice, but he's also a God of mercy. I don't know how that works, but it's not going to be that we go like, it didn't matter how evil or ugly you were. Yeah, that's not going to be the case. So injustice will be judged in some way. But I would also say there's a wideness in God's mercy to give people a chance to change, because we do know that happens. Sure happened for me in my life. And from one who turned from being a God hater, which is where I was, I'm so grateful that there was mercy, wisdom, and goodness. And I was never a bad person in one sense, except for I did a lot of wrong things. But it wasn't that I was destructive to the community. So, the community good is a huge thing for the divine. That's what he made the world to do, is to live together. And so those things do not excuse injustice. It's not going to be, to use a Jewish illustration, the Holocaust is not going to be seen as it didn't matter. It did matter. And there's going to be justice about that. I don't know how that all gets meted out, but that will happen. And when children are abused, when women are abused, when men are abused, those things do have repercussions. And I don't know how that's all going to work out, but it's not going to be that everything is forgiven and it didn't matter, because it does matter what we do in this life.
And I appreciate your opinion on that. You talk about the people who are bad people, and you talk about the people who are good people, and then there are people who accept Christ as their Lord and Savior. So I still don't know if we got to, obviously it's an individual belief. Before we take another break, though, I want you to talk about church today. It seems to me that a lot of what we do, even at funerals, for example, they talk about Christ, and they're more concerned about preparing one for life after death than life. What do you think?
Um, the way we live this life determines how we're going to enjoy or not enjoy the next. It's not just a rehearsal; it's a real thing. When Jesus said, "The kingdom of God is among you," what he is saying is, what we do today can make an eternal difference. And that's the reason I loved what he'd say. If you give a cup of cold water to somebody, you've done it to me. That's amazing to me. So funerals to me are not the place where I tell people you better straighten out. What I really do is to say, what kind of life do you want to live? It is about what you do with this life. And I want to be real clear here. When you said that about somebody accepting Christ, have they done that even though they're good? The point is this: they don't have to use the mantra that I say. They don't have to use these are words that I know from my culture, my background. When I go and share, and I go to a place where people do not know these things, they will often go like, "Oh, I thought that was the case. I just didn't know." Now, it doesn't mean that all of a sudden they had to have me to tell them that. They were on the road to that. I don't know how that, I just happened to be there when the fruit fell off the tree, as it were. But that fruit had been growing for a long time. So I don't know how those things work. And I think and I will use an illustration that I've seen this happen too many times in my life. But when somebody is praying for somebody to become a Christian, and they become a Christian, their family's not, and they go like, "I've not seen them become a Christian," and they die. I say, you don't know what happened. You don't know their heart. You don't know where they are. And I think it's critical. Nobody wants people to live in heaven forever more than the one who made that. Jesus died for that. And I can tell anybody this: if there was a way in the world for your loved one to have peace with God forever, Jesus is the one that wanted that more than anybody. Whatever you wanted, he wants it more. And so I don't know how those things work. But I will say this: I love to see it when people receive Christ. But I will say this too: I've seen people pray to receive Christ who clearly did not receive Christ. I mean, they clearly, and they'll say things. So that formulaic idea, I look at how a person lives. And the thing that you know about Jesus, anybody who reads the Gospels and anybody who knows it, nobody says, "Well, Jesus really treated people in a bad way." Never. And I think that's very important for us to understand, that we almost live our gospel more than we say our gospel. And I think that's a very critical thing for us to understand.
What I'm hearing, and this could be just because I want to hear it, is that it's how you live, whether you accept Christ, in as you said, in the way that you do it formally, or you live that kind of life. You have Christ in you, or Christ-like, let's say. You're on the right path. This is what I'm hearing, and I'm not going to ask you to comment on that.
One thing I do want to say, David, I think it is important. When people say that, "Did you receive Christ?" The thing is, what I want to say is, did you reject him? Did you reject what he says? Did you reject what he teaches? Did you reject that? If you didn't, the acceptance part is where we get stuck. Did you say the right words? No.
And I think Christ is the catalyst here. And again, you mentioned Christ many times, and that's great, and that's how you live. But that could be the turning point or tipping point between what people believe and what they don't believe. But we're gonna leave it go for a minute. We're gonna take a quick break, and when we get back, we're gonna talk about the church and politics and business and poverty. So we'll see you in a minute.
Elevate.
Hey everybody, welcome back. I'm Dave Prasidi here with the pastor at the church at Covenant Park, Dan Crow. Dan, been enlightening so far. I got to tell you, I've learned a lot about you and about the way you think, and certainly more about the way you envision the church and its place in society. But let's talk a little bit more about that, and let's go to politics. We talk about the religious right. What is church's role in politics? Is there one?
Well, yes, but I do want to say this. When people say they're against politics or we shouldn't be political, the thing I would say to them: when you turn on your lights, you're doing politics. When you turn on the water, somebody somewhere is on a board or a group that allows water to work. We have a water commission, electric commission. And all those things are in the part of what we call the political world, the way we learn to live together. And so that, we've tinged the word politics so much to make it so partisan today that it's made it distasteful. But we need to understand that the political side of life is important, and that we would ensure that justice can be done, that mercy can be done, and that we do not overburden some while we do not put a responsibility to others. It's important to have that balance. So when you say how the church relates to that, typically we've seen churches either be to the far right, as we would say that, or we've seen them be a group on the left in that sense. I think that's a very sad thing. I think that we really ought to be, what the church ought to be in the role of politics, we ought to be a prophetic voice saying that this is where government may be overstepping its bounds. This is where this is not a moral decision, or we've got moral issues that need to be addressed. My early days before I became a follower of Christ, I was in the Vietnam days and that type thing, and I was in the marches against the war, and I think it's very interesting that Dr. Martin Luther King, who is a voice that I value very much, was reading some of him yesterday even again, but Dr. King it was seen as a hero on a civil rights area. But he also, because he was a pacifist and he did not believe in violent protest, he had the wedge in the Black community at that time that Stokely Carmichael's and those guys came out for the Black Panthers, and to say, and Malcolm X, that said, we want to use power, that you can only address power with power. And King said, we've got the power of love. And so, King became, quote, an enemy of the state when he was seen as a civil rights activist, but he became an enemy of the state when he said the war in Vietnam is immoral. And so, that's but he had a voice of saying, we do not need, he said, it's not a defensive war that we're in. And he said the millions of dollars and the lives that we're costing there, we could put that to work on infrastructure in America. And I read a quote last night. He said, if we don't pay this bill on infrastructure, the future will judge us harshly. And I think of where we are today, we can't get an infrastructure bill passed. We've got, it's amazing. That's 50 years ago he said that and he wrote that, but he was very prophetic at that point. And that's where the church can speak in behalf of some of the situations that are heart-rending that we have to deal with. And there's not easy answers to any of this. So that's why we don't get involved in it, because we say it's just too big a problem.
Speaking of which,
yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna bring two up, and I'd like to hear your opinions on each. Abortion.
What about it?
Do you believe in it? Do you agree with it? Roe v. Wade. What is your position as a pastor and as a person about abortion?
Okay, I would say this. Number one, it's the law of the land today. That may be shaky here, but it's the law of the land today. So therefore, it's reality. When I had a conversation with Bill Clinton in 1992, that when he came to our church, he and I had some time where we had a talk. And one of the things we talked about, he said, do you have any advice to give me? I said, I would say one thing to you. I would say that every time that you say that you're pastor, you use his words for saying that life begins at first breath. And I said, that's why you say that abortion is good. It's a right thing because a baby hasn't taken a first breath. I knew that wasn't what his pastor taught in the 50s, but his pastor was a smart man, and he would not have been saying that in the 80s or the 70s. And so the thing that I said, I think you're being a little bit disingenuous. I think what you really ought to say, what do you want? I said, I've heard you say you want abortion to be safe, you want it to be legal, you want it to be rare. I said, I think that ought to be a campaign slogan, safe, legal, and rare. And he took that. And the thing that I would say that I appreciate about the former president, he had a learning heart to want to try to do things right. Because listen, abortion's a tragedy. It's tragedy when we're in a situation where oftentimes a person is put into a situation that not always by their choice. We need to understand that, but there's things that we have to deal with that are moral choices. And moral meaning, we need to have mercy, we need to understand. So I think that there are cases where we definitely need to have that as a law of the land. I think that I do not believe that you take a baby at the last bit of their life and you disembowel a baby at that point and say that's a safe abortion. I think it ought to be early trimesters, because quite honestly, life is not formed at that point. I'm definitely not at the point of saying that there's no abortion. Never would say that. I think it ought to have some ramifications to it.
And Roe v.
But
Wade does.
huh?
And Roe v. Wade does, right? I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
it does have stipulations.
Correct. And I will say, when they say that it ought to be up to states' rights, as one who lived through the civil rights stuff back in the '60s, if you'd left that and not had a federal edict on desegregation and those things, it never would have been done in the South, because the local government would have said never. Because I lived in a state where they did say that.
Couldn't agree more.
So there's times for federal mandates that are federal law. There are times for where you take local law and you work that. And government is at its best on a local level. We know that. The local level is the best way to work things, because you know more what's there. But there's times you need moral guidance that is bigger than that.
Right. Do you feel like this is one of the times that we need to have federal jurisdiction instead of state laws? Or what do you think about this, about abortion? Because people want to move it to the states, right?
And I think that's a mistake. Personally, I think that's a mistake.
Okay.
And I think the thing that I would say, I've got ladies in my church that have had abortions. We do not say to them, "This an unforgivable sin." That's something. No, what we have to say is that's something you need to deal with, because some people, it's a very regrettable. They look back on it, they feel they have to deal with a lot of things on that. And I would say this: I think that the male response on that, where they've been abandoned, I think it's pathetically sad what males have done in that time where they've not stood with a wife. I know women who had they felt like they had no choice because they had no family, no other things, and they were trying to survive. And when a male would not stand with them, they felt like they had no other choice. Now, I would say to them, you could have asked for help, but look, that is where I'm putting myself into their shoes, and I'm not really there because their shoes are bigger than I can fill. So those are things we have to understand. But abortion is a complex issue, but we are more for saying, I want life to happen. But every child, if you're going to be against abortion, you've got to be for family planning. You've got to be for contraception, because but see, that's where we say, no, you can't play with any of that. That's folly, because what we have to understand is you can't have it both ways. I think the safest thing in the world is to have these morning after pills, this early, when you don't know if you were protected, that makes sense. You're not destroying a life at that point. You're keeping two cells from coming together.
So why, and first of all, do you agree that there are more abortions during Republican administrations than Democrats? And if so, why? I think you just said,
I don't just believe that. Statistics show that.
Yeah.
Statistics show that. Matter of fact, I was shocked when I found that out to be true. And so when you say why does that happen, I think there has been a couple of years in the 50 years of Roe v. Wade where there might have been an uptick during a Democratic presidency. That's exceedingly rare when that happens. But and I will say this: when George W. Bush was president, because he opened up some of the faith-based initiatives, there was a drop from one year to another in his before it raised again. So there's anomalies to this. But at the same time, I think when you have better social services and you have better things that take care of a woman's well-being and her health, I think that more babies are born during that time. And now the debate can be made, are they being responsible or not? Look, I'm going to tell you, can you be responsible when you said we went into Iraq and there weren't weapons of mass destruction there? The responsibility is easy to throw on somebody else and say they're not being responsible. I think that's a foolish thing to do.
So last topic along those lines, gay rights. What are your feelings on gay rights?
Number one, they need them. To be very clear about that. Dave, that's been a topic that, as a pastor, you can't avoid these things because you get asked these things, and you have to deal with people who are facing these things. I've seen myself shift tremendously. By the way, on the abortion issue, I've had a major shift from where I would have been at one point. On poverty issues, there's been a major shift. On this idea, and you didn't mention some of these, but so many things I've had to shift on, not because I'm accommodating culture, but because I have to relate the gospel to the culture.
You're evolving, to use your own word.
What's that?
You're evolving, to use your word.
Exactly, yeah. And what I would, yeah. Now my critics will say I'm devolving, but, but anyway, so anyway, but they can't really judge that. Okay, I'll just say that. But when it comes to the idea of same-sex relationships, I am totally for the aspect of saying that all people are made in the image of God, and I don't understand. I clearly don't understand how people can say that homosexuality is always a choice. It is clear from anecdotal evidence that I've watched, that I've seen people and I go like, that young man is gay. You know that. He's 5 years old. He's not learning behavior. This is just, he's being who he is. I've seen little girls that I go like, you know what? I think they're probably gay. That's interesting. Now, I think it's interesting that we even look at those terms. That's how my evolution has happened. What I say today is I really don't look at it that way. I say they're becoming. I'm not sure what they're becoming. That's up to them. We'll see how that goes. But it's obvious to me that it's not all just a choice. I think that the people who have a choice is how we choose to relate to people. And so therefore, when I don't like using the word marriage for same-sex marriage, I'm okay with doing that, but I would rather it be the idea that it's it's a formal union, it's a civil union, it's those things. And civil not meaning not religious, but what I'm saying is the word marriage really is related to the fact of it being a man and a woman. That's just the context of that word. We can disrupt that and say that it can be between a man and a man and a woman and a woman. And I'm not against that per se, but I say if anybody had asked me, I would have said, let's find another word for that. Let's call it something else. But I do believe equal rights under the law. I believe that equal access and those type of things. One of the tragedies that I had in my life in ministry in Pittsburgh was that I had young men whose mothers were in my church. The boys were not, because they had been so mistreated through their life for being gay. And they got AIDS. This is back early days, in days of HIV. And when I could go see them in a hospital because I was a pastor, I could do that. But their what they would call their circle of significant others could not, because they weren't, quote, family. And that was a tragedy when these young men were dying alone in hospitals, much like we saw with COVID. When you see people that were dying alone, that is a tragedy when that happens. And that was a self-imposed moral statement. And that is just wrong. That affected me tremendously at that point. And we did not treat people with dignity at that point. And so, I don't understand. The one thing I don't understand, I'm being very transparent here, the transgender thing is another thing that I really don't understand. And I don't know that I can understand that. I'm trying to. I'm reading several books on it right now, and I'm trying to get there, but I'm trying to understand that. If you ask, could a gay couple come into our church? Absolutely. They can come in. We're not going to say, no, you can't come in.
I was going to ask you that, but
so I mean, when you say are you for it or against it, well, you got to say who's here, and who's not here.
You've accepted it. So let's move on to business and poverty. Now, what do you mean business and poverty? So for those of you who don't know, that Dan is the chairman of the board of Open Door America. And it's a nonprofit. It was originally based in Baltimore. Now it's based in several areas. And Dan, I spoke to your CEO, who I used to think was executive director, Bill Simpson. And he says that the reason that ODA is still involved is because of you. Now,
wow,
that's a huge compliment, but why don't you explain real quickly what ODA is and why it works?
Open Door America, we seek to help people come out of what we call systemic poverty, intergenerational poverty. We're about helping people live a better life and have a trajectory in life that moves forward and upward. What we do, we work with an individual life plan that helps address areas in a person's life, whether it be financial, whether it be social, whether it be health, whether it be wellness, whether it be community involvement, skill betterment, education. We work on a life plan that is tailored to the person so that we can meet their needs where they are. We realized early on that we couldn't have a one-size-fits-all and say everybody has to do this trajectory, but everybody did need a life plan. And so we've got our life plan where it can adapt to where the needs are at the moment, and then we can grow there to make them well-rounded. It also, our goal on doing that was to have people take responsibility for what they could do, to realize they do have a choice. They're not trapped by the man or a system that would say it is always stacked against them, even though it looks like it is. And so we were about empowering people to really live a life that is what I would call fruitful, on a trajectory going forward, where they can give back to the community, because that's really what people want. We'd never met a person working with the impoverished people who said, man, I just really want to scam welfare. People want to be off of welfare. They want to be able to work and have a contributing mind. Some of our remedies that we've done governmentally, socially, they've made people become more dependent, no doubt. But that's not what the people really want if they really have a choice. People become dependent because they think they don't have a choice. So,
You know, I will say this, you've walked the walk, literally and figuratively. I know you've been on the streets of Baltimore for years. You know the lay of the land. And you know, when I say business and poverty, to me, as a business person, I truly believe that a living wage scale job is the answer. And so how can, and we're going to relate it back to the church again, how can the church or the churches, whatever, how can the religious community impact this whole intergenerational poverty in a sustainable way? And I mean that by there's no greater organization, nor there should be, that does more charitable stuff for people. But it seems like it's all individual churches doing individual things, and it's hit and miss, and it's not a sustainable model. I think ODA is because it creates jobs and it matches business needs with people needs. What do what can churches do, Dan, to promote this, business interaction with inner city, let's say, or people that need work?
well, in inner city things, it's really hard for me to have a church in Howard County have a direct impact with things in Baltimore. Now, we can support things, but doing that, it becomes increasingly difficult. Now, what we did find is that the people we were working with in the impoverished areas, and we were working with a lot of people coming out of the drug game, they said, it won't be long till you're dealing with this in Howard County. And that's true. It's come right out here. Matter of fact, we work with the jail here, the Howard County Detention Center, trying to get people coming out of jail not to go back and have recidivism rates. But, what a church can do, number one, it can get involved with, we are involved with the NAMI, which is the National, I forget what it stands for, but it's the Association of Mental Illness, where they're really trying to eradicate some of those issues that lead to poverty issues, and or at least contribute to it and are a result of it. But you work with different social groups. Our church relates with grassroots, with NAMI, with the Howard County Development Enterprise Corporation. We do different things so that we can make a social good that is bigger than what we are, but we can contribute and give leadership in doing it that way. Now, the other thing we do is we have people that get referred to us. And when they come to us, there was a man here just a while ago, I don't think we heard the background noise, but he was walking through, that he was released from Howard County Detention Center 5 years ago. We began working with him, and today his son is with him now. He'll have his 14th birthday next week. But then what will happen is we found that his life trajectory totally changed, and he's sustaining now, and he's doing fine. He never had been able to do that, but we helped him get his carpenter skills in place. We helped him grow together, and so we do that type of thing. I think of him because I just heard him a while ago, but we've done that with numerous people who came out of the system, to be able to have them be accepted. Again, when you come out if you've been in jail, in prison, which I never have, I spent just a night. I've never been in jail for long term. But when people come out, they feel like there's a stigma there, and there is. But that's what we love, and we do good. And again, I think we start one person at a time. And Dave, that issue is such a huge thing. We'll spend the rest of our life trying to deal with those issues. I think that's what the new heavens and new earth are going to do. It's going to finally have the poverty issue addressed.
Well, there is a huge gap between the haves and have-nots.
Yeah.
And being in business, I know that we were able to engage. But we interviewed Bill Simpson a couple of weeks ago, and he said that the people on the streets, let's say in Baltimore, are more concerned about today, about now, about what's happening now. They're not looking down the road. And I say the same thing about business people. Business people are looking at the bottom line today. What are we doing today to make tomorrow better? And the problem is neither are looking forward enough. And I say this, you're doing a great job with now you mentioned one person, right?
Yeah.
You helped one person, and that's massive. That's massive.
Yeah.
But how do we scale it up? How do we scale it up?
Yeah. And I knew when I drew out that one illustration that looks like the one, we've done that with a lot. But the thing is, it's still the drop in the bucket.
In the ocean.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And the thing that we don't, but I will say this, every social change starts with a person doing a thing. I love the quote that is said of Mother Teresa. A wealthy benefactor was watching her do what she did one day. She was taking care of the poor in Calcutta through Sisters of Mercy. And as she was doing the work of taking care of a leprous person with all the tough hygiene, that type of thing, this person looked at her and said, "I wouldn't do what you're doing for $10 million. And she said, "Neither would I." I love that quote. She said, "Neither would I." She said, "You couldn't pay me money to do this, but I have love, and that's why I do that." Now, that doesn't handle the economic issues, but I will say this. I do try to influence the business persons we have in our church not to hire people at wages that people can't live on.
Bingo.
I encourage them to do that. I say, you don't need to think that that's okay. It's not okay. It is not okay to not respect somebody enough to think that their job is important. We learned this in COVID when we talked about the frontline people, but I will say it this way. If your garbage service breaks down, and you live in a city, you're gonna have a real problem in about 1 week. That's all it's gonna take.
Yep.
And we say and I hate the term where we go unskilled labor. What I would call that is essential labor that people need to do. It's important labor. And we demean people often. We've done that by saying, if you don't have a college degree, if you don't have a white collar job, that's just not true. And we've missed the fact where people used to be in a guild, an artisan, where a person made shoes, where a person, assembly lines take away those things. We've done it that way. But we need to understand essential work is important work. And we don't need to act like it's servile and it's servile. It's really important for us to view a different way on that.
If there's one thing, Dan, that the good thing that's come out of COVID, it's that people are beginning to get a little bit, they're being paid attention to more. You call them unskilled, I call them latent skilled, right? I mean, people that and the essential workers. One other thing I didn't hit that I want to before we jump off is, Dan, why do you think there is such a political divide today in America?
Polarization happens when you do not have a capacity to see yourself in another person. That's what happens. We become polarized. We cannot imagine the way that person thinks or acts or is. And so therefore we write them off because we can't see ourselves that. I think that's hubris on our part. We're arrogant to think that's either beneath me or that's so wacko I wouldn't do that. But I think that is what has happened. And America has become more and more a nation we've always been a nation of immigrants from the beginning. But the thing is, we're having influxes and numbers shift in the demographics that we don't know how to handle. There's a lot of insecurities. There's a whole lot of insecurities. And, with an aging population that we're having now, the fastest growing population in America is 85 and up. That's kind of scary. It used to be 65 and up, but it's getting older. And we're seeing those things happen, and we don't know how to deal with that. And so, again, when a party wants to do what's best for that party, and it's going to, if an institution tends to self-preserve, they don't think of the whole. They're just thinking of their own. And so now, by the way, you mentioned the abortion issue and the gay issue. I never thought those two issues would be resolved because both parties use those as their major fundraising points.
Yep.
The fact of the gay rights thing that happened so quickly in culture, I couldn't believe that happened, because that was the biggest thing, that the right would be saying that's going to destroy our country. The left would be like, we're hurting these people. And I didn't think they would ever get rid of that issue, but it did. It looks like the abortion issue, that's happening too. So if those things happen, I don't know what we're going to fight over, Dave.
So,
You know.
you used the word, I don't know if we were on or off air, catalyzed.
Yeah.
Has our former president Donald Trump catalyzed this polarization?
Do you ask me, did he?
Did he? Yes.
Oh, okay, I just didn't hear that.
Okay.
I think he introduced a spirit of win, not a win-win, but it's either win or lose, and you cannot lose. I think he did do that. I think he did introduce a spirit of non-compromise. And I think that the very nature of living together is compromise. If a husband and wife get married, there's either going to be compromising made, or they're not going to stay married.
That's right.
That's just the way that works. And if both people always agree, then one of them is not necessary. We're not made that way. And Dave, you and I, we've grown together through differences, not through things that we always agreed on. But the thing is, we had enough that we believed in, which was mutual respect, and we appreciated each other, that we could forgive times when there was lapses that we felt that we were slighted or whatever that is. But we value who we are, and that to catalyze things in a positive way means that we continue to believe in the inherent worth of people and the fact that we can help and that we can grow. We have something to do. Jesus said it, and again, I go back to Jesus because he said the most profound words I've ever read. But when he says, "You are the light of the world," now he said he was the light of the world. Says that in John 8:12. But he also said, "You are the light of the world. Let your light shine, that people will see the good deeds you're doing." And guess what he said they do? They'll glorify God in heaven. And and that again, that's that universal call, Dave, that we're talking about. Instead of that, he said, "You do those good things." And then the big thing, he said, "I'm giving you one commandment." This is the last night of his life. He said, "Love one another as I love you." If you do that, everything works. It just flat works.
Well, on that note, I want to give you the last 30 seconds, because I know you like to me, to anybody, whoever's listening, what would your advice be in general, right? For anyone and everyone to do something that will make their life whole. How would you urge that person to go forward? What are some of the things the average person can do, or anybody, not when I say average, anybody can do to make their life whole?
I'm going to give you an illustration of a guy that came to our church. This guy came to our church late in life. He had not been in a church in over 50 years. And he came because he was fascinated that he kind of found the sermons interesting. And he came at the behest of his wife. And he said this. He didn't tell me this personally, but he says, "I'm going to do what Dan says do this week." And so when I talked about going and loving somebody, being kind to somebody, doing that, when I said, look for the people on the street that you can help, he started doing that. He said, as I did each one of those things, my life changed. He said, my life got better and better. And I found out that it works. That when you see what the next good thing you can do, you do that. And then he says, "Hey, I'd like to know this Jesus guy." He said, that would be important to me. Now, the thing is, he found Jesus by doing what Jesus said we ought to do. So the thing I would say to somebody, be the encourager, be the lifter, be the edifier, be that one that adds goodness and grace to somebody's life. The apostle closed his letters, the apostle Paul, by saying, "Grace and peace be to you." That's what I'd say. Have grace and peace. Grace means that you have the power to do something good. Peace means that's what you feel after you've done it. And that's what I encourage people to do.
That is a great ending. I can't tell you how much I appreciate, your friendship, but this interview too. It's meant a lot to me, and I'm sure that it's resonated with a lot of listeners. And if you want to get in touch with you, Dan, why don't you tell the audience how to do that?
Okay. Yeah. Our website of our church, it's a very simple website, but it's TCACP, the church at Covenant Park, tcacp.net. You can go there and you can find out info about how to connect. But you can also download our app, And the app puts you into our YouTube channel. It puts you in, if you like the way the flavor of these talks were today, I do messages every week that are recorded, that we have them out. I do a talk on Monday night called Crow Chat that are rougher. They're done at my home, and the quality's not as good on one side, but I talk about topics, just about life in general. And so you could check that out. That's the TCACP on YouTube. That's the YouTube channel. Subscribe. We'd love to have you be a part. Sign in a comment. We'll get back to you. And you can write me. If you go to the website, you can see the address is there, and I'd be glad to write back. I respond to emails. Yeah.
Awesome. And again, thank you so much. And
Sure.
Thank you for listening, and we'll talk soon.
So follow me on Instagram and Twitter at Elevate Industry. Check out my YouTube channel at Commercial Construction, Elevate the Industry. Visit my website, adicorp.com, ADICORP.com. Go to LinkedIn, search for David Procida, hit connect and follow me. Please rate, review, and comment on this episode, and I look forward to seeing you next week.
Elevate.